over where you are?
It it's nice. Like it's been cooler, which I like a lot. I've gotten to wear my hoodies. Um
Yes.
hoodie that is important in life. Hoodies are
Hoodies are
very, very
important in
important.
life. I
Yeah.
pulled out my flannel for the first time. It's like 65 and it really feels like fall.
Oh, nice.
I am sincerely enjoying it.
It is so awesome. So we're going to give a few minutes for people to come in and see. We got about 15 already, so we'll probably get started here. But for those who are used to like regular geeks like us scheduling, this is a little different
This is not the
because
same.
this is not a geeks like us thing necessarily. I mean, it is because we're here, we're geeks, we're doing things that are all like all the geeks that we are. But this is for Save Against Fear, which is the Badana Group's annual convention con slash soon to be like training con as well for using gaming in therapy. And we're really excited to be here and to be talking about running games for women and girls. Let's see. I think we might have pretty much everybody here who's registered at this point. So let's should we get started?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So, I'll introduce myself first. So, I am Dr. Megan Connell. I'm a psychologist practicing physically out of North Carolina and virtually out of Washington State, Virginia, and North Carolina. And as soon as I finished, so I packed other places as well. I am the co founder of Geeks Like Us, where we celebrate all things geeky and where we are unapologetically enthusiastic about many things. I also run tabletop role playing games I only run games for women and girls, but I used to run mixed gendered games as well. And then I'm also the host of Clinical Role, which is a live play D&D game for psychologists and other therapeutic dungeon masters that is here on Geeks Like Us every other Monday and super duper fun. And I am joined today by an amazing psychologist and someone on the other side of the country. So, Elizabeth, why don't you introduce
Yeah.
yourself?
So my name is Dr. Elizabeth Kilmer. Like you mentioned, Megan, I'm a clinical psychologist as well. I am the director of education and training for Game to Grow. Game to Grow is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We do a lot of stuff, but we're most well known for our D&D therapeutic social skills groups. We also have a comprehensive training program for educators, mental health professionals, and community members who are interested in learning more about therapeutically applied RPGs. And
Awesome.
I have run groups with therapeutically applied role playing game groups, but with ages 8 to 86. I run a lot of mixed gendered groups, but I also have run groups for just girls as well.
So you've gotten 86-year-old players?
I got to
That's
86. Yeah, the VA
oh,
is a great place
oh
to
my gosh, that's
capture
so
some of the
fun.
older ages. Yeah.
Awesome. So we are here today to talk about our experiences of running therapeutic games specifically for women and girls and some of the things that come up and the thoughts that we have around that and our experiences of it. So first off, let's talk about like why do we run games for women and girls? Elizabeth, do you want to start off with this? Like,
Sure. I think that there are a lot of good reasons to run mixed gender groups. There are a lot of good reasons to run single gender groups. I know that when I first started running these groups, I was running groups in a children's advocacy center with children and teens who had experienced criminal child abuse. And about 80% of the cases we saw had experienced some kind of sexual abuse. And uh, for a lot of our clients, having a space that was a single gendered space often felt really, really safe for them. I think we um, having having something like therapeutic applied D&D for all of the girls that I ran these groups with, most of them had never played a lot of games before. They had not engaged in kind of any fantasy, and because they were where they were developmentally as well, in the like 10 to 13-year-old range, having a space that was just girls allowed them to feel a little bit more comfortable in terms of engaging in the game, being silly, being a little bit ridiculous. And so having that space was a nice place to kind of start out for them, especially.
that's awesome. Yeah, I'll say for me, I actually had a pretty bad personal experience in gaming. It was one of my first non-family run D&D
Hmm.
games, and I was the only girl in the whole game or woman. And one of the other players during an encounter had their is a trigger warning for sexual trauma here stuff, but they so their character was going to rape an NPC to death. And that was super not okay
No.
with me, and, like, I didn't
Yeah.
know what to do, and, like, this was still, and it's actually, turned out to be a good bonding for my dungeon master and I because, like, actually it's actually months later I came to him and was like, "I was super uncomfortable with this."
Mhm.
And, like, he was able to say, "I was too. I'm so sorry. I was a baby DM. I did not know how to handle my table, and I didn't
It's a
realize stuff like
great
that would
argument
happen."
for session 0 content.
Oh my god. Well, we didn't have a session. We were still figuring
I
out things, and,
absolutely,
like,
yeah.
it needs to happen, and I didn't want and I've heard so many similar stories from other women when they're the only woman in a group that stuff gets brought up, and, like,
Mhm.
it's not okay, it's not comfortable, and so I wanted to make a space for women and girls to, 1, learn how to play D&D where there wasn't that threat, but also, like, watching mixed gender groups, especially, like, I work with the adolescents as well, in this time where the guys start learning to talk over the girls more and more, and that it's okay to talk over the girls, and they don't fight for their voice, and I really wanted finding voice to be part of the work that I did. I wanted to have a place where they could start to learn, feel comfortable in their knowledge, and then go out and play, and that was something that
Mhm.
was really important to me, and so it was a big part of why I wanted to run all girls games, and I continue to run all girl games. They are absolutely amazing and wonderful. Um, we don't have many slides, by the way. I'm a big believer in if you can get all the information from the talk from the slides, then we are redundant and unnecessary. So we're gonna go pretty much to our next big slide, and then there's only one other with that does not have a pretty picture on it. So when we are running therapeutic groups, the difference between playing for fun versus playing for therapy is one in the consent and intent, like it was very explicitly where you're saying this is a therapeutic group. And part of therapy is having therapeutic goals. Um, now I know for my groups, have some general goals that I'm always working towards, and of course, those will change mildly depending on the makeup of the group and what the individual goals of the players are. But Elizabeth, for you, I'm curious, like when you ran your groups, did you have like a specific group goal or was it always changing depending on the players?
Yeah, so I'm still running groups. I run groups for adolescents and adults as well. They're mixed gendered. And with my groups, like you said, I have general goal groups as general groups for the general goals. Man,
It's
general
Friday.
goals. It is general goals for the group as a whole, as well as individual goals, and those are both based off conversations that I have with my clients about what they're hoping to get from the group, as I observe the group over time. um, More kind of goals will come up around that. Common goals that happen are things like perspective taking and insight, building confidence, building assertiveness is a really, really common one. Learning kind of effective conflict resolution or just not running or shying away from conflict are common goals across my groups.
Yeah. Yeah. I have some similar ones. So the way I phrase it to all the girls in my groups, I have three primary goals. Like one is that finding a voice, right?
Hmm.
I love how you put it as like assertiveness training. I said like more like I just want you to be able to find your voice and use your voice. Is the way I end up phrasing that. I also want them to learn how to build cooperative relationships with other women. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I know you could speak to this way better than I can, but like, tell me a little bit about the research on how women treat each other.
So the research around relational aggression is pretty amazing. I had a professor in undergrad actually she was my developmental psych professor, and she said I would always rather have boys than girls because boys will the and research supports this, and a lot of this is going to be around the way that we raise boys and the way we raise girls. There's not research to support that this is just like inherently in DNA. This is very much the way that gender is a social construct. But that boys tend to get mad at each other and fight it out, and then they're done. And girls engage in this kind of long form relational aggression, which is something that is, having experienced it myself. I was bullied a lot in elementary and middle school, and it's awful and it carries with you. And so having a safe space where you understand how to give and receive feedback is something that is if we did nothing else in these groups, I think that would be reason enough to run them, is being able to tell someone when they did something that you didn't like, and being able to tell someone when they did something you did like, and being able to have that honest conversation is something that is so valuable and so important and often doesn't happen because we get
Mhm.
these messages that we shouldn't, don't say anything nice. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. Right. And the reality is, don't be a jerk, but also if your feelings have been hurt or someone's done something that you're not okay with, it's really important to be able to have a conversation with them instead of just disappearing or engaging in passive aggressive communication.
Yeah, it's so important, and like that idea of learning conflict resolution at the table. It's
Absolutely.
oh my gosh, because like we're not taught like what to do when people annoy us or we're angry or something, and like it's so cool in therapeutic games. So not just like all girl games, but just any therapeutic Dungeons and
Mhm.
Dragons or tabletop role playing game is when the characters are not getting along, but the players are. It's
Yeah.
such a fun teachable moment because then we can role play
Mhm.
like, okay, how do your characters come back together as friends? And how do we move
Yes,
on from that?
absolutely. Well, and one of the things that I love about this, right? Because you have the players around the table and then you have your characters in your fantasy setting. And part of the reason that conflict resolution can be really hard is when we start to feel overwhelmed or we start to feel attacked, we can hit that kind of fight, flight, or freeze. And that
Mhm.
fight, flight, or freeze response is great if you're like being attacked by a mountain lion. But it's generally not particularly helpful if you're getting in trouble at work or you're getting in trouble at school or your friend is mad at you. Because when you enter that fight, flight, or freeze, the part of your brain that is good at the logical problem solving part kind of shuts down.
Yeah.
Your body is more focused on your physical survival. And so having the space to be able to pull you back from your character or pull you closer to your character can help you regulate. It can help provide a little bit of scaffolding so that you can engage in conflict through your character and you're less likely to feel overwhelmed, attacked, or just shut down.
Yeah. And it is really amazing to see those light bulb moments and people, when the players click with this stuff, and like, so that idea of like, here's a group where we're going to learn to problem solve, we're going to learn to have positive relationships that are cooperative. And that's when I
Yes.
talked about the third part. That's one of the big things is like in our culture, in American culture, because I know probably we have an international audience, is we're taught to be backstabby. It's this thing that women are it's not like an explicit lesson, but it's sort of this thing that's expected, right? And like
Well, because it's more reinforced, right? Because standing up and saying like, "Hey, I didn't like what you did," often is labeled as bitchy
mhm,
or annoying or uppity, and that's problematic language to begin with. But if I stand up and I say, "Hey, I really didn't like what you did," and then everybody around me says like, "Hey, stop being so loud, stop being so annoying," right? The message from everybody else is not what that person did that wasn't okay. It's, "Hey, you shouldn't act that way." And so we
yeah,
get a ton of messages from society that tell us that we should not be direct in our communication. And I think that both women and men get those messages, but women tend to get those messages more. Like think about how I don't want to get, I'm not going to necessarily bring politics into this, but in terms of like the most recent debate, Joe Biden told Trump to shut up, and the internet broadly applauded him for that as like, oh,
mhm,
this is a reasonable thing to bring in. Whereas there were a lot of commentary around like, would a female candidate have been able to say the same thing?
yeah,
Would she have been treated the same or would she have been applauded? And so we see this play out on a national stage as well.
yeah, and it's really troubling, and so like it's wonderful to have this place where you can completely change the setting and like give those supportive relationships and to dive into this. Um, And so, where I want to spend the bulk of our conversation today is talking. Well, actually, I'm going to backtrack. Sorry. It's Friday again. I cannot organize my thoughts.
Understandable.
Yeah. So, I think one question people might have is like, what's the difference between running like a all guys group, an all girls group, or mixed gendered group.
Mhm.
I know I have what my answer is, but Elizabeth, I'm curious for you. What do you think the difference is?
Oh man, I think it depends a lot on a whole lot of things. So I've run groups in a lot of different settings. So I have run in the Children's Advocacy Center, which is primarily um, children and adolescents who'd experienced trauma. I run groups in private practice where the main focus was around anxiety and depressive symptoms. I've run groups in the VA from primary care and mental health and substance abuse. I run a lot of groups with Game to Grow, and a lot of the challenges we see are things around anxiety, depression, but also ADHD and autism. Um, I would argue that like those kinds of contextual factors can change the dynamic just as much as gender does.
Hmm.
Um, and I one of the things love about getting to run lots of different kinds of groups is how much those groups will often challenge my own stereotypes. I know that when I ran a girls group for the first time, I had this thought in my head that we would be doing a lot more relational work. We wouldn't necessarily be murdering goblins or bandits. And it turns out that 12 and 13-year-old girls who've experienced trauma and don't have a lot of control over a lot of things in their lives want to murder a lot. They don't want to
Yeah.
just murder rampantly, but they want to, when you give them the option, these bandits have like kidnapped kids or have stolen puppies, they want to murder them. And not
Hmm.
in like horribly graphic, concerning, problematic ways, but really as this way of kind of like taking back power and being powerful and in control. So it drives me up the wall whenever people say, well, if you're running a group for girls, you really want to think about how they're probably not going to want to fight as much.
Yeah, and
No.
that was sort of my point of bringing this up because that was my experience too. Like, I try a lot of different things with my groups. Like at some point, I think I'll figure out what my system is. I still haven't gotten there yet, 3 years in. But like at one point, I was using like little cards where they could anonymously turn them back in with one side was a plus of what they want to see more of, and the other side was a negative,
Absolutely.
what they want to see
Yeah.
less of. I don't think anybody put a negative thing on it, but like on the positives for all of them said more combat. And one of them completely filled up the entire card with combat, 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 combat.
Combat, more combat. I want to get well, and if we think about it too, this really makes sense, right? And what that's telling me is that you've really managed to create a safe space.
Mhm.
Because if society is telling girls that they should sit down and be quiet and be polite and they shouldn't be aggressive and they shouldn't be powerful, and not that combat is the only way to be powerful.
Yeah.
We play with that a lot in our games, but it is one way, and I think that it is a way that is especially important to highlight for girls when they're often told that like physical prowess is not something that they're going to get to have in their
Yeah.
lives, and it's not something that even if they kind of pursue is necessarily going to be broadly reinforced. And so I think it's awesome that you've created this environment in which they felt comfortable saying, like, I want more combat. I want to do more of that.
Mhm.
Because that probably wouldn't have been positively received in a lot of places in their life.
Yeah. No, I agree. And like they have so much fun. Like one of my players was a big number cruncher and I gave them a super
Hmm.
powerful magic weapon, which whatever, I don't care. Like, yeah, it broke the
I
game,
gave
but
my players infinite power the other week.
oh, nice.
I haven't regretted it yet.
Well, but, like, it's so interesting because, like, this player was, like, on the smaller side, like, for their age even, like, they were really petite, and, like, to be able to sit and be like look, they did all the math really quickly, and they're like, "Oh, I could potentially do 60 points of damage per round." And, like, that
That's
just
awesome.
it was so awesome to see that kind of like, "Yes, here's where I am powerful, here's where I'm strong," and, like, come on, we all do this, like, I just got personally to finish that campaign I was talking about before. I stuck with it, and we just finished level 20, and, like,
Wow.
it was so fun, but, like, realizing my bard with bardic inspiration and everything, if I rolled a nat 20 on a persuasion and I got a 12 on my inspiration dice, I could get, like, a 56 on performance or persuasion.
That's amazing. I love that.
Yeah. it's just like, that's ridiculous, and that is so much fun. And that's what, sometimes that's where you have the fun in the game, and, like, I think that's so important too, is, like, making sure that these games are safe, fun places.
Mhm.
And that was something that, we both mentioned a little bit, like, with session 0 and making sure we have a session 0. So with structuring groups and, like, creating those safety rules, there's a whole consented gaming panel that's happening tomorrow at 6:30, I wanna say? Or si
I don't remember what time,
I
but
don't
yes,
remember.
there is.
Tomorrow, there is a consent and gaming panel. Tune into that for a really broad, good discussion of consented gaming and what that looks like. But, aside from, like, going over typical, like, consent things, are there any special considerations that you have for session 0? Not just for girls' games, but for any therapeutic games?
Yeah, I mean, I think the consent is really important. Getting something that's really important for me is getting an idea about the making sure we're all on the same page about the kind of game we're going to play. So
Mhm.
when people come into my groups, some of them have played D&D before, some of them have played Pathfinder before, some of them have played No Thank You Evil, some of them have never played anything, some of them have a ton of experience with fantasy. I've had people in my adult groups who've been playing tabletop RPGs since before I was born. And so it's really important to kind of get on the same page about what's the kind of game we're playing. Yeah, we're playing by 5 D&D 5e rules, but like ish. Like there's
Yeah.
things that I throw out the window because I don't care about them. They don't fit in my style. So getting on that same page, I find, and this is what I'll say about any kind of session 0 thing, is it's a process.
Mhm.
Um, especially with newer players or players who've been playing a while, but our table looks a little bit different than previous tables they've been at. It's really important to realize that just because you've given someone a yes no list or a no please list at the beginning doesn't necessarily mean that they actually have the ability to completely fill out that list for them. That there may be things that change over time. I just started a group, so it's a brand new group. Nobody in my group had any experience with D&D before, and I kind of gave them an adventure to go on. They were going to go hunt down, like there was a animal that was really bothering this nearby town, and or a monster that was bothering this nearby town, and they were convinced that it was probably bothering the town because something had happened to it or there's something wrong with it. So I had set up this what I thought was a very clear like go murder the thing, and they were like, oh, we have to save it, and that totally changes everything that I'm going to do for the rest of the campaign, right? Because
Mhm.
this is not a group that wants to have a clear cut, this is an animal, a monster shaped animal. But instead, we need to be okay, the villains are probably going to be people the villains are going to be people of
Yeah.
some sort, because they're really focused on saving and caring about animals. Now, that's not something that came through in a no please list. It was something that I kind of had to be paying attention to as this group was going, and I had to be willing to be flexible because I could have said, oh, well, you try and like calm down this animal, and no matter what you try, even though you've got a sleep spell and like 12 other things, it's going to keep attacking you. Like I could have done that, I could have railroaded them,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that would have shown them that their choices and autonomy don't matter.
And that's not what we want to be doing in
It's not my
therapeutic
goal.
games. Yeah, we
Not
we
my
wanna
goal.
be giving the choice. Well, and we've already kind of dived into what I wanted us to spend the bulk of this, on. Um, what some case examples or case stories? Because story time, I feel like, is always sort of the best lesson time.
Absolutely.
And I wanna start with one, and, like, this is my story where I was a brand new therapeutic dungeon master, and I was actually considering all my groups pilot groups because I didn't know if it was gonna work. I didn't know if it was gonna be therapeutic or not, and, somebody I had been working with individually joined one of the groups,
Hmm.
and one of the big things we've been working on with this person was finding their voice and standing up for themselves, and they were very big time people pleasers, and, they made a character, and, we had been playing god, we hadn't even been playing that long. I think we had had 3 sessions maybe of just kinda playing through a little campaign, and at the end of one of the groups, this player hung back and said, "Hey, I just wanna tell you something." I was like, "Okay, cool, what?" And they said, "Well, my friends asked me for a ride to some place I didn't care to go." And I was like, I had no reason to go there, and I felt myself about to say yes, and then I thought about my D&D character, and I knew my D&D character would say no, and so I said no. And this was the first time my groups are for girls, but it's the first time this girl had stood up for herself and said
Mhm.
no to people that she valued. And like it was like this shift. And like we'd been working for months in individual therapy and it didn't happen for like a few weeks of, D&D. And suddenly that lights bulb was going off and like they were standing up
Absolutely.
for themselves.
That is such a great story, and I think it really highlights one of the things that I love about this intervention, and it's something that's consistent with the research. So, uh, D&D, there's a lot more to it, but part of what it does is it's simulation training.
Hmm.
And we have so much data from like military and medical and educational and sport around how effective simulation training is. Like that, if you practice something here, it translates over here. Like it works. And I love that. And that is a really great example of like those experiences in game then
Hmm.
translated to her out of game experience. I have a player uh who like again like 3 weeks into a session kind of came at the kind of checkout portion, came in and said, you know, I intentionally designed my character, or I my character is someone who's like really outgoing and really assertive, and like I'm not that way, but I've been trying really hard to be more assertive in this group. And I had the group had to make a decision about where to go next, and she wanted to go left, and the group wanted to go right. And instead of just going right, she said, "Well, I really thought about what my character would do, and like I want to be true to this character because I want to practice this skill." And she said, "So I kept saying that I wanted to go left, and eventually the group actually was like, 'All right, we'll go left.'" And talking about this during the checkout was also really important because she got the chance to say like, "Hey, I tried this," and everyone went, "That's awesome," instead of saying, "Yeah, you were really pushy about it." Right. And so I think like having both that experience to try these things out, but then the space to get to kind of check in. And she had enough trust that she was willing to be vulnerable and say, "Hey, I'm trying this thing." And the
Hmm.
whole rest of the group, you're here and the goal is to kind of be supportive of each other. And so they were able to give her that feedback that, like, yes, you succeeded and we thought it was awesome.
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I've um another story I have too is again early on. I had another client who similar thing was didn't have a voice and didn't feel like they could stand up. And like
Hmm.
that was they wanted to always be agreeable. They wanted to always please everybody around them as much as possible and not cause waves. And
Hmm.
so I created a scenario and so I was like, I want to push this person because like they never let themselves express anger. And like anger
Yeah.
towards it does turn into depression. And that was their struggle. Is like, when you meet them and you look on the outside, you're like, oh, this person's just really depressed. It's like, no, no, no. They're actually really, really angry, but
Yes.
they don't feel like they have a safe way to express that anger. And so they keep pulling it inside and it's damaging. And so I stole something that Ivan Van Norman did on oh gosh, I can't remember the name of the tabletop game. It's the one where you're playing with the friend computer. Um, it's not
The
Dread.
tables of the game where you're playing with a friend computer.
It's a futuristic game. It was made in the 80s,
I
but
don't know.
I can't remember. Paranoia. Thank you. That voice is Sven. That he chat can't hear we can hear the producer. You all can't apparently. But he's playing Paranoia and he gave them this puzzle where they had to get to level 10. And what he did was he took a shoots and ladders board and he made each room have 10 buttons to represent the 10 squares on each row. And you
Oh, interesting.
and you had to push buttons, and if you pushed the right one, a ladder would come down and you would go up however many things, or the floor would
Yeah.
open up into a chute and you would go down.
That sounds so hard.
Oh my gosh, it's wonderful if you yeah. But yeah, I made that for my players for a wizard's tower. And so by the time they finally got to the top, because they would fall down, keep falling down,
Keep falling down. Yeah.
they were super duper frustrated. And when I do live games, I'm very dynamic. I'm standing up, I'm
Hmm.
walking around the table. And so I stood up as this NPC and it was kind of like this crotchety old mage. And this person, they got up They got right in my face. Of course, this is before COVID, and we weren't worried about
In the before
this
times when you could
in the
like
before
stand
times.
within touching distance of people.
Yes, you didn't have to be in, safe boxes. They're, pointing at me and yelling at me in character and just being angry and be like, "How dare you? And you're doing all this mean stuff to this area." Blah. It just told me right off. It was beautiful. And then like I did the like, "Hey, you just got angry and showed your anger. What was that like?" And they're like, "Oh, I did." And it was just so cool to have them have that again, like that we were just talking about that
Mhm.
rehearsal moment, right? Of
Absolutely.
I've now rehearsed this and I see that the world did not end because I expressed anger and I wasn't
Yeah,
something other than pleasing. And that it
absolutely.
is so cool.
Yeah, my very first girls group, they were, um, on the hunt for this magical object, and it had 3 pieces. Um, it was a piece of a wizard staff, and it had 3 it'd been broken into 3 pieces, and they were on the hunt for it. And as this adventure went on, I realized that the group was kind of starting to split a little bit. So they had realized like I don't like what you're doing and I don't like what you're doing. So obviously the solution is for just us to just split up. Like why we're not going to address what's
Mhm,
going on. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to do any of that. We're going to split up. And I was like, okay, so like in this place, like they need to be able to talk about what's going on. If they're not able to just talk about it, there needs to be a little bit of conflict. And this is a safe space where I can help kind of coach them and scaffold them through having effective conflict. So obviously, I don't want any of my players like yelling and screaming at each other.
mhm.
We want to make sure that it's a safe space where they're able to resolve it effectively, but splitting up is not necessarily the answer. It's what's they've been doing the rest of their life, and it's probably not working super well. Especially, we're also
Yeah.
seeing some of that like relational aggression come through because there's those like those comments of like, oh yeah, well you just go that way because like, oh yeah, I'm sure you're right, and it's that like those kinds of the little
Oh, yeah.
sarcasm is coming through. And so I introduced. They found this divining rod, and so it was this magical stick that would lead them to each piece. But there's only one divining rod, and there was no way that they were going to find any of the pieces without this magical divining rod. And so they had to take it and they had to work together and they couldn't split up. And I just waited and we kept playing as they started getting more and more and more and more frustrated with each other until finally being frustrated, they got to the amount of frustrated where it was too hard to hold it inside and it was like worth actually expressing it. And so it blew up a little bit in a controlled way in the middle of this game. And so we actually had some space where we actually like I put the screen down and we talked about what was going on and we talked about like the costs and benefits of talking about things when you're frustrated versus holding them in when you're frustrated, and like what are the short-term consequences and the long-term consequences, and like how does this happen and how does it play out in your real life. And it was this amazingly powerful moment. And that was not the last time this group had conflicts, but it was the last time that this group let conflict build to a point where they kind of just exploded. So like moving forward, they got to they went, "Oh, yeah, this didn't work out for us. We've been pissed at each other for the last 4 weeks and we've been like coming to group frustrated and we've been leaving group frustrated, and that really isn't working for us." Now I could have intervened a little bit earlier, but then they would have lost that experience of
Mhm.
this is what happens when we're frustrated but we still care about finding this wizard staff. And so after that, every time they kind of got frustrated with each other, they got to practice talking about it. And it was in this safe space where sometimes they would use their characters to talk about their frustrations, sometimes they would talk about it themselves, to be able to kind of work through and understand how can I talk to someone when I'm mad at them, and learning that conflict does not necessarily mean the end or a problem in a relationship. That conflict can actually be a healthy part of a relationship as long as that conflict is done effectively and respectfully.
Yeah. No, that's such a powerful tool and like it, it's so interesting because like that's something that I think everybody teaches, right? It to a certain extent. Like that conflict can is an important part of, everybody fights and stuff, but like honestly, how often do we get to see that, like, in our popular media where characters get into
Never?
an argument, resolve it, and then they're okay? Like, it is I think, like, I saw a couple of examples of that on How I Met Your Mother, which unfortunately that show got ruined by the finale, so I can't rewatch it.
I
Sorry,
think it's
that's
a
a good
really
show.
common like romance trope, but
Mhm.
oftentimes like it's not effective conflict. It's like we did a really bad job at conflict and now everybody's feelings are hurt and now we're going to do something unrelated to the original conflict that doesn't actually address the problems that happened and now everybody feels good.
Yeah, yeah. And that's not what effective conflict resolution looks like. We've got to work on expressing our side of things and coming together and helping out. And like what I love too that's wonderful in therapeutic games is that ability to step in and step out, to do the hokey pokey with your character, right? And of like, okay, so how is your character feeling right now? Now let's step back. And so you as a player, what do you think of how your character is reacting? And sometimes they'll be like, I think my character's being really unreasonable right now. Right. And
Yeah.
they can see that, but then it's like, okay, cool. So now what do they need? What does your
Yes.
character need right now to progress and to move on? And like, again, it teaches us how to communicate our needs and to clearly state things.
Well, and one of the things that I love, and this is something that I'll do in individual therapy as well, but I think is especially powerful, and there's so much space for it in like TARPGs, is if a character engages in something, right? Like they yell at everybody. Or I had a character, I had a player who was really used to being rejected
Mm,
and got in the habit of rejecting others before she could be rejected, right? Which
yeah.
totally makes sense. If I'm rejected
Yeah.
all the time, I'm absolutely going to develop behaviors that lead to me being rejected, so that I can just be like, well, I had control. I rejected you before you rejected me, so it was, at least it was my choice. And the party was moving into a town and they encountered this guard and they needed to get information from the guard, and before anybody else spoke up, her character walked up to the guard and said, tell us what you want to know or I'm going to kill you. And the guard said, well, um with an opening like that, I don't really know why I would expect you to not kill me even if I do tell you what you want to know, so no. And the whole group was like, "Why would you do that? Like, why would you start at 100? What is
Yeah.
happening?" And so they said, "Hey, guard, like, why don't we buy you some lunch? We'll go over there to that restaurant. We'll like talk about it." And this player said, "Well, I'm gonna stay outside because I just ruin everything anyway."
Oh,
And I said, "Man, it sounds like your character is realizing that starting with that threat of violence might not have been the best way to go, and but the character really really cares about the group succeeding, and right now the best thing the character can think about doing is standing outside and like taking a deep breath and calming down while the rest of the party goes in and kind of tries to talk this guard up in a way that gets in the information." So I'm assuming a lot of best possible intent here, and I'm allowing the player, and I don't think that was actually what she thought through because she'd already hit fight, flight, or freeze. Like she was
yeah.
not thinking this through. She realized, oh, that was the bad reaction. Now everybody's mad at me. Um, but giving her that space, it allowed her to have the time. I put everything on the character. Your character
Yep.
is doing this. Your character is feeling messy. Your character might be thinking X, Y, and Z. So it allowed her to step back, and I gave her an out. I gave her an out. I gave her a reasonable explanation. I gave her a plan for what she's doing next. And then she also got the choice to say like, yeah, that's totally what my character's doing. Or no,
Mhm.
my character just hates you and thinks that she sucks, right? Like
Yeah.
the she still has the autonomy and the power to do that or not. Um which is something that I think is really helpful. I'm watching the chat a little bit. I'm noticing there are
Yes.
some questions coming through. Can
Yeah, I was
we
gonna say, let's
talk
maybe
about some of
switch
those?
some questions. Yeah, well, I'll pop over to questions, and there's our contact
Excellent.
info, so where you can find us. So I have my phone open. Sorry.
I've
But
got one that I've seen and read.
yeah,
Can I start
go
us
for it.
off? Okay. I don't know how to pronounce anybody's screen name, but somebody fish Says I can find it can be hard to manage everyone's personalities and personal therapy goals amidst trying to improv what's going on next or stay in a storyline, etc. Any tips for managing it all in a given session? It may just be something that I need to do the best I can with. I have a lot of tips, but I will give you like two today. The first one is practice and get training. So Game to Grow has a training program that's
Mhm.
comprehensive, and I'm biased, but I think it's great. Um, Part of that is going to be about the treatment planning. So whenever I start to feel stuck or overwhelmed, I always go back to treatment planning. So having an understanding of what are my goals for the group and what are my goals for the individuals, and I will like write those things down. I'll also then think about how can those goals be met through the encounters that I've planned, and then also just spend some time brainstorming about okay, because when we're thinking about the therapy that happens in any game, some of it is happening through the encounters that you've planned, but a ton of it is happening from what your players bring in.
Oh
And you
yeah.
are not going to anticipate everything your players bring in. You're not going to anticipate all of their reactions, and you shouldn't have to. But having an understanding of, okay, if these kinds of things happen, how can I use that to leverage or go to these goals. I also really recommend consultation. So finding other
Mhm.
facilitators that run groups that you can talk with. Game to Grow offers professional consultation groups as well. Um, but finding that space and finding that place to practice.
Yeah.
Do
I
you want to add to that, Megan?
definitely, yeah, piggyback off that. So a few things. Actually, lots of things. So one is limiting the number of players in your therapeutic games. In the training that I co-authored with Dr. B that we have offered through Leyline, is we talk about limiting to like 5 or 6 players. Running therapeutic games online, I limit to 4. I find
Yeah.
more
I
than
think it
4.
depends. I'll go up to 6, but I'll go up to 6 in certain contexts with certain goals and certain populations.
Yeah, yeah, and, like, it's you gotta understand for yourself too, because like, for me on the headphones in a Zoom call, when it's, more than 4 people trying to get my attention, I can't focus anymore, and so that's, like,
Absolutely.
having to learning my own gate. Um, and, like, I have a session tomorrow talking about bringing random elements into the game, because like used to be an over planner. Like I planned so much and I had very, very specific therapy goals for each group and each session and how we were going to get to them. And like it was way too much. And like my players still had fun and learned a lot, I think. But when leaned more into like the lazy dungeon master method of prep and planning and rolling with what was coming up in the group, the
Mhm.
therapy increased so much. It got so much better. Um, Another quick story time. This is one I've told, well, most of these I've told before, but I had a session where they were trying to stop a cult of Vecna from bringing Vecna to the prime material plane. And so they had to go and get the hand of Vecna, and a black dragon had it. And so they were sneaking into the swamp, and black dragon spotted them. And in my player mind, I'm like, okay, this is where they run away and come back and live another day. Nope, they decided to try and parlay with the black dragon.
That sounds right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course.
um, and it was interesting, and like I had not planned for that at all, and so this was 100% improv. But one of the players, like they were a cleric and they were trying to offer up their own hand to get cut off and put on because like that black dragon getting to corrupt a lawfully good cleric. Oh yes, that is exactly what that dragon wants to do, but that's not what the player wanted to do. And it was this interesting thing where the other players and the other characters talked this character out of it and came up with a better solution. And for that player, it was incredibly therapeutic because the next week they came in and they actually sat down and processed with me. They're like, I was hyper focused on that. And like
Mhm.
that, they looked and they're like, would that have killed my character? It's like, I probably would have tried to find a way for your character to be saved, but most like in any other situation,
But it
yeah,
would not have been good.
it would not. It was like there was no way that was going to be good for your character. And they were just like, "Oh my gosh, I do this. I get hyper fixated." And it was like this way where they had this big realization about themselves that they can get hyper focused on one solution even
Mhm.
to their own detriment. And so it happened in this really
Absolutely.
safe setting where they're with their friends and there were no real world consequences for it and they could have that kind of therapeutic insight. So while like trying to balance this stuff out, there's a lot to manage and it is it's practice and just like you said, consultation supervision is super important. I mean,
Mhm.
I also do that on my own and then also through Leyline, but like there's a lot, and I think they also do it through Bahana too. We're here for Bahana, so like there's lots of places to get it. There's and
Mhm.
in the counsel of many is wisdom, and so like
Absolutely.
learning from all these different methods and models of doing it is incredibly important. But like as you go, you find your footing and you find your voice and you find out how much planning versus how much improv works best for you.
Yeah, and it's something that will change depending on the groups and the settings that you're in. And it's
Mhm.
something where you and by like the group, right? Like I have run, one group of veterans between the ages of 40 and 55, and then run a second group of veterans between the ages of 40 and 55, and those groups looked totally different.
Totally different. Yeah.
So just everything is going to change and become different. So figuring out like what works with you and figuring out how to get your footing in the like constantly changing river that is this kind of treatment orientation is something that's really important.
Yeah, it's definitely. Do we have
Do you
other
want to pull the next
questions?
question or you want me
I
to?
can you skip the I'm looking at an itty bitty screen. So if you
That's okay. I'll pull the next question. There are a lot of questions coming through, so I'm definitely missing some.
Yeah. I see
Um,
some I did see this one earlier about like do we see
yeah.
the same clients individually as in group? For me, it's a mix.
Mhm.
Some, not all. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a mix. I think uh just kind of it's going to depend on your setting and it's going to depend on kind of what your clients need as well. Um, Squid is saying, I'm a male therapist. Would it be weird for me to run a therapeutic tabletop RPG group for girls? Maybe. It depends.
Maybe. Yeah.
Can't give you a better answer without knowing more details about that one.
Yeah.
Next question. Callie is asking, what do you think about ending games when they're therapeutic? I'm used to completing treatment goals, but sometimes games can go for years. Do you guys have set amounts of time? Say a game will run for 6 months and be over by the end of the 6 months, despite not meeting goals. So I think oftentimes with group treatments, that looks different than individual treatments.
Mhm.
So typically with group treatments, it's important to have an understanding of and this I guess any therapy it's important to have an understanding of what the expectations are we going to go for 10 weeks are we going to go until you meet these goals um I find that having a time is often really helpful. Typically with my groups, all so like with Game to Grow and within the VA, groups would run for about 10 weeks. Now you have the option to enroll after that. You can go to these 10 weeks and then you can keep going for 10 weeks. I've had people who have come to 10 weeks and then been like, I feel great, I'm done. I've had people who have will come for people will come to groups for years, but having that expectation of the time I think is really helpful, especially because oftentimes one of the things that is challenging is termination or
Mhm.
graduation. And so having expectations around when and where that might be appropriate can be really really helpful. And there's not solid data on this that I know about. This is mostly anecdotal, but it can make it easier if a client is thinking, okay, well, I think I've gotten what I need out of this group, or my life is really picking up and I can't be in this group anymore. Knowing that there is this kind of generally agreed upon time for graduation or termination can be really helpful to be able to have those conversations without anyone feeling abandoned or just ghosted.
Yeah, yeah, my groups run for 10 weeks at a time as well, and I plan out so week 1 is session 0. I use the game to grow method of collaborative homebrew, and,
Uh huh.
then I come up with a story, and then weeks 2 through 10, we're going through that story, and then we're wrapping it up, hopefully starting to wrap it up week 9, finishing wrapping up week 10, and then we process and finish up, and sometimes, like, there's still more to explore in that story, more to explore in that world, and we'll continue like the next session, those who can enroll will continue on, or we go, okay. And like players can switch characters between sessions if they want to, but I generally try to have the story finished up to come to a satisfying ending of some sort in those 10 weeks.
Yes, absolutely. Having cliffhangers in between groups is really really valuable. But at the end of 10 weeks, or at the end of whenever the agreed upon ending is, I think you should have your story broadly wrapped up. I would never want to use a cliffhanger as a way to try and encourage someone to
Oh
stay
God,
in a
no.
group.
Ooh, that
I
would
want
be
them to really be
probably
able to.
unethical. Yeah.
I agreed. Yes, I want them to really be able to make that choice. Um, Another question that is coming through. So the guy wrote, I don't think I totally understand your question. So I'm not going to try and answer it without a little bit more context. Um, if you maybe I'm missing some words there, Megan.
Where is that
Um,
one? Sorry, I'm
it's
just
up
scrolling
a
through.
little bit in orange
Uh,
type. It starts with my first non-consulting D&D session. So if you want to explain a little bit more about what you're asking.
Oh, so maybe this is a thing of having expectations of where the story goes and it doesn't go the way you
Hmm.
want it to, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
so the question is, my first non-consulting D&D session involved a genocide of a fictional native race, children and women, and I explicitly explained the race to the players, but they explicitly wanted to exterminate the race. How do I eliminate my own resentment and still assist the players in moving forward in D&D therapy? So I think without knowing more about kind of this context, I think it's really important before you play any game to have an understanding of what your boundaries are, what you think is important to keep
mhm,
safe for the game. So we talk about this being a safe space, but that doesn't mean that it is a space without boundaries and a space without consequences. I, as the GM, get to decide whether or not something actually happens. It's okay for me to say, you don't get to exterminate an entire race of people. It is okay for me to say, nope, new choice. So having an
mhm,
understanding of what you think is going to be what is going to be, what works for you as well as what works for the group. It's also important to recognize that even if you use all of the best safety tools and you have really good relationships with people, some people still might not feel comfortable speaking up when
yeah,
something makes them uncomfortable if they think they're the only one in the group who feels uncomfortable. So especially with things like that, I feel really good about saying like, nope, we're not going to do that. There are ways that you can do that. You can make the game just not let that happen. You can explicitly talk about why you're not okay with that or not comfortable with it. You can ask things about, this is another one where you can say, like, it sounds like you really want to feel powerful, right? Like you can ask
yeah,
questions and make assumptions about what's happening, but it is always okay in any kind of game to set boundaries to keep yourself and the other people in the game safe.
yeah. No, I agree with that. And like, yeah, no, Elizabeth said it perfectly. I'm not gonna. Someone asked something. They said it earlier. They break it down. Have you utilized gaming to help autistic girls address the concerns they may have, given in person struggles with masking, etc.? Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Many of the girls in my groups are on the autism spectrum, and
Hmm.
it definitely helps a lot, especially with perspective taking, learning reciprocal behaviors, rehearsing, talking about trying to understand nonverbals, because a lot of times if the people aren't acting out how their characters are, they're going to be physically describing what's happening. And so
Hmm.
it, I think a lot of the, well, so for some of the research that's being done and like a lot of the utilization of tabletop role playing games has been for those on the spectrum to include women and girls. And like I
Hmm.
feel, we're doing better at recognizing autism in women and girls, but I think it's still not as recognized as it probably is actually occurring. So this is a really powerful tool, as always with theory of mind, perspective taking, cooperate, all the different things that we
All
want
the
to,
things.
all the
Also,
things.
I think it's really important. I think we share this, Megan, but the work that we do is often very relational based. So like we very much believe
Mhm.
in common factors, and the autonomy of our clients. And so anytime we're working on kind of like increasing your social effectiveness, it is increasing your social effectiveness and your like that is client values focused, right? So if my client is on the autism spectrum, I'm not just saying, well, I think you should be good at making eye contact with people. It's more about talking about what's working for you and what's not working for you, and how can we make you more effective in a way that still feels genuine for you and comfortable. So there's not like a checklist of, if you're on the spectrum, these are the goals that I have for you, and your opinion doesn't matter. But it's much more about like, can we, if this is what's getting you stuck, can we explore that in this game in a way where you get to like try out a couple of different strategies and figure out what works for you, what still feels genuine and comfortable for you.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think what's cool too is again, so much of the therapy happens in a group without without the therapist intervening or getting in the way of it. Like one of the groups I ran, we had just finished up a 10-week session. We were starting a new 10-week session and one of the players said that they were not going to be able to continue and the group was sad. Is they're like they were going to miss the player but also miss the character because
Yeah.
that was their barbarian. And then she walked into the room and the whole room started cheering and they were excited. And this person was completely taken aback because she was just so used to not having friends and telling herself the story of nobody likes me, nobody wants me around. And like, this was not rehearsed. I didn't even know they were coming. And she just walked in the room and everyone went, yes! It was amazing. And like, that, like, that's so powerful. And like, sorry, I love D&D and I love that we
No,
do
that's
it.
awesome. That is an awesome story. I am just seeing a message come in from creations that I am fixating on because it's pink. But they're asking, I wonder if you've had any girl groups that are specifically queer identified, or if you would mix those that identify as straight with those who might identify as queer or gay. So my groups currently are mixed. I would love to run like a specific queer group. It's something that I've kind of got on my ever growing list of kinds of groups that I want to run. Currently, they're mixed. I find that this can be really, really helpful, especially for people who are questioning or exploring their identity.
Mhm.
I recently had a player who changed their character and used that change of a character. They introduced their character and said, my character goes by they them pronouns, and I said, that's great. And they said, actually, I also go by they them pronouns. And this was new. I've played with this character for about a year, and we asked about pronouns at the beginning of group, and they identified with she her pronouns, and now they are saying my pronouns are they them. And this was such a cool way for them to say, I've decided to I have um like changed my character, and I'm using this change of a character as a way to also introduce this. And it was clear the way that they said my pronouns are they them also, that there was a little bit of, I'm not sure how the group is going to react. And the group was mostly not surprised. No one reacted
Mhm.
particularly strongly, and immediately started using their correct pronouns, which I thought was a really, really awesome experience. I've had other players that have said, I'm not really sure, or I'd really like to play as a male character because I just want the chance to explore that. Is that okay? And so having this space is really important. You also want to be able to talk to parents who might have concerns if their kid decides to play a male character. Does that mean that my child is trans? Not necessarily. There are plenty of reasons that you might want to play a gender that is a character that is a gender different from which you experience. So that's important to kind of keep in mind, that you want to be able to have these conversations and do any myth busting that you need with parents. But I
Mhm.
found that having, as long as you're creating a safe space, having um, having a mix of people and a mix of identities is really, really powerful. And just like we want to have that safe space for women and girls, and that's part of why we
Mhm.
run all women and girls groups. I think having queer groups as well is something that would be awesome.
Yeah, I agree. Like when we were doing face-to-face groups, I do little name placards. So they've got a little fold out because I'm terrible at remembering names. And so it's the player's name, the character's name, and the player's pronouns next to their name and the character's pronouns next to their name
Yes.
as well. And
People
they're
change
welcome to
their
change that all the
Zoom
time.
names, is what I do right now.
Yeah, that's what I do as well. Sometimes they remember, sometimes they don't. So we do our best. We do our best in these weird times. So I think we are pretty much out of time for this. I like we could go longer, but I know people have other panels to attend to and things. And so I guess we'll sign out, but like our Twitter handles there. Please feel free to reach out to us. Dr.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'll
Yeah,
just
we have a couple of trainings that are coming up that I'm really excited about. So we have a mental health level one training on October 25th. That is full, but there is another one on January 16th that is filling up. So get your spot now if you want it. We also have Educator will launch December 12th, and Community is November 16th, I believe. But feel free to reach out to me either via Twitter. You can also find me, Elizabeth K at gametogrow.org, if you have any questions about our training programs or our consultation groups, or anything else like this. I love to talk about this stuff.
And I'm Dr. Megan. I'll be here tomorrow talking about running groups for game masters and also bringing random elements into play with Connor from Gemhammer Gaming, who's the creator of the Deck of Wonder, which has brought much chaos into my games and is so much fun. And I will
Oh my
always use it.
gosh. Yes, I'm playing in a home game with the Deck of Wonder, and it has led to so many fun things, like a new pet turtle. Which I
Oh,
don't know if that was the total intention of the card, but we have a very nice GM. So Game to Grow will also be running a session tomorrow afternoon about Critical Core, which is like a boxed set of kind of D&D light and a lot of the kind of skills and practices that we do kind of all in one set. Adam Davis, one of the executive directors and creators of Critical Core, will be here to talk about that. So
yay.
Squid, yes, the training is through Game to Grow.
Yes. And yeah, and you can also I do trainings through Leyline Geek Therapy. So you can find me there, or you can find me on Geeks Like Us on our Discord. Every Monday streaming something. Every other Monday it's D&D. And but enjoy the rest of Save Against Fear, and we'll see you all later. Thank you so much for
Yes,
tuning
bye
in.
everybody.
Bye.